Welcome to the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. This lecture is intended for students enrolled in the Academy's Classical Ethics course. If you're not enrolled and would like to join us for self-paced studies, please visit classicalliberalarts.com. My name is William Michael. I'm the Academy Headmaster, and I'll be leading this study. In this lesson, we're beginning our study of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Aristotle was a Greek philosopher, the greatest of the Greek philosophers, who lived from 384 to 322 BC, and wrote this work around 350 BC as a systematic philosophical study of human character and the good life. The Nicomachean Ethics examines what it means to live well and be happy, teaching us about virtue, friendship, and the highest good that all human beings seek. This opening chapter serves as the foundation for the entire work by establishing that all human activities aim toward some good, and that there must be a highest good that gives meaning to all the others. This text has profoundly influenced Catholic moral theology, especially through the work of St. Thomas Aquinas, who integrated Aristotelian ethics with Christian teaching to show that human reason can discover moral truth that leads us toward God as our ultimate end. So before we get into the text itself, let's take a moment and commit our time to prayer, asking for God's help in our studies. Let us pray. Lord our God, in your wisdom and love, you surround us with the mysteries of the universe. Send your Spirit upon us and fill us with your wisdom and blessings. Grant that we may devote ourselves to our studies and draw ever closer to you, the source of all knowledge. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. St. Thomas Aquinas, please pray for us. Let's read together the text of Chapter 1 of Book 1 of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Every art and every method, and in like manner every action and deliberate choice, appear to aspire after a certain good. Hence it is well said that the good is that which all things desire. Of ends, however, there appears to be a certain difference, for some of them are energies, but others of them, besides these, are certain works. But in those things in which there are certain ends besides the actions, in these the works are naturally adapted to be better than the energies. Since, however, there are many actions and arts and sciences, there will also be many ends. For the end of medicine is health. The end of the ship-building art is a ship. The end of the military art is victory. And the end of the economic art is wealth. But such arts as are of this kind are arranged under one certain power, just as the bridle-making art is arranged under the equestrian art, and such other arts as pertain to equestrian instruments. Both this art, however, and every warlike action are arranged under the military art. And after the same manner other arts are arranged under other powers. But in all these, the ends of those arts which are architectonic or master arts are more eligible than all the ends of the arts which are subordinate to the master arts. For the latter are pursued for the sake of the former. It makes, however, no difference whether the energies themselves are the ends of actions or something else besides these, in the same manner as in the above-mentioned sciences. This was Chapter 1 of Book 1 of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Now, having read the text, let's take a moment and identify the different parts into which this text may be divided. In Chapter 1, we can divide the text into 10 significant parts. 10 significant parts, and we'll go through them one by one here before we get into the interpretation. The first part of this chapter begins in the first line, where we read every art and every method, and so on. Here, Aristotle states his fundamental principle that all forms of rational human activity aim toward some good. So part 1 states the universal principle. Part 2, we read, "Hence it is well said." Here, Aristotle provides his now famous definition of the good as the object of all desire. So part 2 is the definition of good. Part 3 begins where we read, "Of ends, however, there appears to be a certain difference." Here, Aristotle distinguishes between two types of ends: energies, which are the activities themselves, and works, which are products that are made by activities. So part 3 discusses the distinction of ends. Part 4 begins where we read, "But in those things." Here, Aristotle explains that when an activity produces something, the product is usually more valuable, more important than the activity itself. So part 4 will be labeled the superiority of works. Part 5 begins where we read, "Since, however, there are many actions." Since, however, there are many actions. And here Aristotle observes that because there are many different activities, there must be many different goods or ends sought by those activities. So we'll label part 5, the multiplicity of ends. Part 6 begins where we read, "For the end of medicine is health." Here in part 6, Aristotle provides several concrete examples of how different arts aim at different goods. So part 6 is examples of particular ends. Part 7 begins where we read, "But such arts as are of this kind." Here, Aristotle introduces the idea that arts are organized into hierarchical relationships. So we'll label part 7 as the hierarchy of arts. Part 8 begins where we read, "But in all these, the ends of those arts," and so on. Here, Aristotle establishes that higher arts have more important ends than lower arts. Higher arts have more important ends than lower arts. This part 8, it covers the principle of architectonic arts. Part 9 begins where we read, "For the latter are pursued for the sake of the former." Here Aristotle provides the reason for the hierarchy, and that'll be the label for part 9. And then lastly, part 10, where we read, "It makes, however, no difference." This is the conclusion. Aristotle concludes that his principle about hierarchical ordering applies whether the end is an activity or a product. So it applies to all ends. So there we have the division of this first chapter, 10 significant parts of this lesson, which we'll go through in detail now as we move on to the interpretation. So let's go through each line, and we'll make sure that all the vocabulary is understood. There are quite a few important words or vocabulary items in this lesson, and we need to make sure that when we read Aristotle, we are well, first of all, let's remember that we're reading an English translation of Aristotle. Aristotle wrote in Greek. So we're reading Thomas Taylor's translation of Aristotle, and we want to make sure that we understand the English words that Thomas Taylor uses when he translates what Aristotle has written. So let's make sure that we pay careful attention to the vocabulary. One important note about that, remember that Thomas Taylor lived in the 1800s, the early 1800s. So if you ever look up an English word from one of Taylor's translations, and you should always use the Oxford English Dictionary, if you look up a word in the dictionary, one of the great benefits of the Oxford Dictionary is that it will show you different definitions or different meanings for words, and it will also identify the time when certain definitions applied to certain words. So as you go through the options in the dictionary, make sure you look to see that the definition that you're using actually is dated to the time of Taylor's translation. That's one of the great benefits of the Oxford Dictionary. So again, if Taylor is translating in the 1830s, we want to look at how the words were used, the English words, when he was writing and translating in the 1830s. That's why a historical English dictionary is so valuable in our studies. So let's go ahead and begin with the very first sentence. We read, "Every art and every method, and in like manner, every action and deliberate choice appear to aspire after a certain good." So here, Aristotle begins by identifying four categories of activities that, when taken together, represent the complete scope of rational human activity. So it's not just a couple of random things. These are important terms. They name different human activities, different rational and willful human activities. The first term that's used, art, is used to mean a productive habit that is guided by reason. A productive habit that is guided by reason. We can think of this as a skill or a craft that creates something, that produces some work which is external to the worker, external to the person who's acting. A good example of this would be shipbuilding. The shipbuilding art produces a work that is outside of the shipbuilder. It's important to note that this is different from our modern idea of the use of the word art, which we use to signify creative expression. When we say that something is artsy, we mean that it's expressing itself in some creative way. Aristotle's idea of art here is not talking about creative expression, but involves rational knowledge about how to produce specific things, to do so in a repetitive or reproducible way, an art. Second, the word method means a systematic, ordered way of pursuing knowledge or conducting activities. A systematic, orderly way of pursuing knowledge or conducting activities, one's method. Third, he mentions action, and by action, he refers to activities, human activities, that remain within the person. Human activities that remain within the person, like thinking, meditating, and so on. Fourthly, he mentions deliberate choice. Deliberate choice. Deliberate choice is rational decision-making that involves both intellect and will working together to choose future actions within our power. And you may say, well, that's a mouthful. It is. It's an important concept. Deliberate choice. It's a rational decision that involves both the intellect and will working together to choose future actions within our power. In other words, things that we choose willingly after thinking about them clearly. That's a real human action. For example, if someone threatened me that they were going to kill me if I made a certain decision, and out of fear, I made a decision to avoid being killed, that would not be a deliberate choice. The deliberate choice might be to save my life, but doing what I was told to do in order to save my life would not be my deliberate choice. I would be choosing that under the threat of violence. So every art, method, action, and deliberate choice, 4 different kinds of rational human actions. Make sure you understand what each of those terms means. Aristotle says that all of these different human actions appear to aspire after a certain good. This word aspire means to reach for or to aim at. So all of these truly human activities, it seems like they're always reaching for something or always aimed at something. And what Aristotle is saying here is that there is a universal principle in all human action. Whenever humans engage in any form of rational activity, whether they're making things, whether they're following some kind of orderly procedure in learning, whether they're doing something like thinking or praying or singing, whether they're making reasoned, deliberate choices, they're always aiming toward something that they consider to be good or desirable. This is not sometimes true. We don't sometimes do things for some desired end. We always do these kinds of things for some desired end. So what Aristotle is establishing here as a principle to guide this whole study of ethics is that human beings, when they're doing human things, are always seeking what they consider to be good, or some thing that they consider to be good. And also that seeking good is fundamental to human nature. It's fundamental to rational beings. Seeking good is fundamental. It's built into rational human beings. That's the universal principle established here by Aristotle. He goes on to say, quote, "Hence it is well said that the good is that which all things desire. The good is that which all things desire. So because every rational activity, every true human activity, aims at some good, Aristotle can use this to define what good actually means. He says that good is whatever things naturally seek or desire. Whatever things naturally seek or desire, that's good. So that's his definition of the good. The good is that which is desired. The definition that he gives here is important because it shows that good is not just a subjective opinion, but it's something real. It's something that can be discovered by observing what things naturally tend toward. When Aristotle says the good is that which all things desire, when he says all things, he doesn't just mean human beings, but all beings in nature, since even plants and animals, when observed, seek what benefits them. It's very interesting to see that plants, when you plant a seed in soil, the plant will immediately begin seeking what's good for it. It will begin seeking nutrients. It will send out roots into the soil. It will send up a shoot that rises up through the dirt and out into the sunlight. We can watch the seed. We can watch the plant seek what it considers to be good. The same thing is true of animals. Animals can be led by what they desire. If they desire warmth, if they desire something to drink, if they desire something to eat, if they desire to reproduce, their behavior can be controlled by controlling the things that they desire. So we see this all through nature, and Aristotle is saying the same thing is true for man. The difference is that man, being a rational creature, seeks things that the irrational creatures don't seek. So the things that man considers good, we should expect that they're going to be different. And what's important about this is that Aristotle establishes this as an objective foundation for ethics. And it's based on what can be observed about natural tendencies. So it's not just a theory. It can be demonstrated. We can look and see this principle in action among all people and all animals, even all plants. All natural things demonstrate the truth of this principle that the good is that which all things desire. So note that this is Aristotle's philosophical observation based on human reason and natural observation. He's seeking to establish the identity of what is truly good based on reason and observation. Those are the methods used by a philosopher. Later in history, Christian philosophers like St. Thomas Aquinas would interpret this natural desire for good, which philosophers like Aristotle were able to recognize. Christians would interpret this as ultimately pointing toward God. So not pointing towards other created things, but ultimately pointing toward God himself. And this is where St. Augustine got his famous saying where he said, "Our souls are restless until they rest in God. Our souls are restless until they rest in God." They're designed to seek their good, and the good of the human soul is God himself. It's important to remember, though, that Christian understanding was not present in the mind of Aristotle. Aristotle was making a much simpler point. It can be seen in all different created things, that they are designed to seek their good. And so the question then that Aristotle will investigate is, what is man's good? What is it that man seeks? We can see what animals seek, even different animals. We can see what plants seek. But what does man seek? What is man designed to speak? And Aristotle will investigate this by means of just reason and observation alone. He goes on to say, quote, "Of ends, of the things that people seek, there appears to be a certain difference. For some of them are energies, but others of them, besides these, are certain works. Some of these ends that are sought are energies, and others are certain works." So we've got these two important vocabulary words, energies and works. This word energies often confuses new students, because when we think of energy in modern language, we think of being excited or having lots of power and being eager to do something, bouncing around with lots of energy. That's the idea. But that's not what Aristotle is referring to here. He makes a crucial distinction about the different kinds of goods that human activities can aim toward. He uses the word end, which just means a goal or a purpose. What is your end? What is it that you're seeking? What's your goal? The term energies refers to activities themselves, doing or performing something, like playing music or thinking. The activity itself is referred to as the energy. He also says the other kind of end is works. Works refers to products that are made or produced by activities, like a song that is produced or a house that is built, something that exists outside of the person who is acting. So Aristotle makes this distinction here between energies and works as the different kinds of ends to help us understand that there are fundamentally different kinds of goods. Some activities are valuable in themselves. They're good for their own sake. Other activities are valuable because they produce something that's good. Making this distinction, as Aristotle does, between action and production, or energies and works, is going to be central to Aristotelian philosophy and ethics. Again, the distinction between action and product, between energy and work, an important principle in Aristotelian ethics. He goes on to say, quote, "But in those things in which there are certain ends besides the actions, in these the works are naturally adapted to be better than the energies." So when an activity produces something that's external to the agent or to the one acting, Aristotle says that that product is usually more valuable than the activity that made it. And this makes sense because productive activities exist for the sake of their products. We do certain things because we desire to produce certain things. We want the products. We only do the action because it makes or brings the product to us. A builder goes to work in order to create a house. He doesn't go to work for the sake of going to work. The house is more important than the act of building, because the building activity is done for the sake of the house. So when one thing is done for the sake of something else, Aristotle says that for which something is done is more valuable or more important than the action itself. Aristotle says in these, the works that are produced are naturally adapted to be better than the energies. When we see Aristotle use this term naturally, he means that he's talking about in the real order of things. So it seems that in reality, things that are produced are more valuable or better than the actions that produce them. However, this principle that Aristotle introduces here applies only to productive activities, not to actions that are done for their own sake. There are some actions that are done for their own sake. Those are not inferior to actions done for the sake of something else. He's simply saying that when there is an action that's done for the sake of a product, that action is inferior to that product. He's not saying all actions are inferior to products. There are many actions which are not done for the sake of a product, which don't even cause a product to come into existence. They are not inferior to products that are the results of actions. So, for example, virtuous actions, like the virtue of temperance. A temperate action is not done to produce some external product, but a temperate action is valuable in itself because it makes the person more perfect. So actions that produce products are inferior to those products, but there are many actions which don't produce products. Aristotle goes on to say, quote, "Since, however, there are many actions and many arts and sciences, there will also be many ends." So here Aristotle draws a logical conclusion from the principle that he just established. He says that if every activity aims at some good, and we can observe that there are many different activities, then there must also be many different goods. Aristotle shows us here that human life involves pursuing lots of different kinds of goods, a multitude of goods. So it's not just some simple single end that's sought by men, but it's clear that men seem to seek many, many different ends, ends within ends. We do all kinds of things for all kinds of different purposes. Some of them are short-term, some of them are long-term, some of them are for the sake of themselves, some of them are for the sake of something else. So we can see that there's this complex number, this complex system of goods or ends that we work for by all different means, by all different activities. There are many different pursuits, many different valuable pursuits of all different values relating to one another even. But this multiplicity of ends, when we see this, it leads us to ask a very important question. That question is, if there are many goods, how do we choose among them? Which goods are more important than others? How do we actually make this judgment? How do we know which end is more desirable than another? Is everything sought by every person equally good for every individual person? Or is there some kind of ultimate or chief end that is the best of all ends which all men should be seeking? So this question how do we choose among all of these ends, sets up Aristotle's argument for trying to discover whether there is some highest good that can give order and meaning to all the other individual goods that we pursue. Not only is this a hierarchy, which means an order of ranking goods, not only is there a hierarchy, that's not all we need to know, but we need to know what's at the top of that hierarchy. What is the highest or chief good of all goods? Because if we understand that, then it would seem that we can understand why we should pursue all of the goods under that highest good, and it should also help us to judge how much we should pursue them, or when we should cease to pursue them, when enough is enough, and so on. So we can see how important that knowledge is for making choices in life. Aristotle goes on to say, quote, "The end of medicine is health. The end of the shipbuilding art is a ship. The end of the military art is victory. And the end of the economic art is wealth." So here Aristotle gives us some examples. He says that the art of medicine is not done for its own sake, but it's done in order to produce health in the patients who are being served by the physician. So there is a work that's sought by the art of medicine, which is health in the patients. Likewise, shipbuilders work in order to construct a ship. The ship is the purpose for the work. Military leaders, everything that they do is ordered toward the goal of victory in war. Those who manage households or who engage in economic activity or business aim at acquiring wealth. That's what all of their activity is for. So these examples demonstrate that different productive arts really do have different specific goals, and we can identify what those goals are by observing what the men are trying to accomplish that perform those activities. What are they doing? What are they trying to produce? Why are they doing what they do? We can observe and learn what those ends are. Every art makes sense because of its particular end or goal. Every art makes sense when we understand the goal of the art. And in the same way, this is Aristotle's argument, in the same way, human productive activities in general are rationally ordered towards specific goods, rather than just being random or meaningless. And human beings aren't acting randomly. There is an order that exists in the world which we can discover and understand if we examine the world carefully and reasonably. Aristotle goes on to say, quote, "But such arts as are of this kind are arranged under one certain power, just as the bridle-making art, making bridles for horses, that is, the bridle-making art is arranged under the equestrian art, the horse-riding art, and such other arts as pertain to equestrian instruments." So Aristotle goes on to argue that arts and productive activities are not all equal in importance, but they're organized in relationships where some arts and some products serve other arts and other products. The art of making bridles, which is used, the bridle is used to control the head of the horses, which controls their whole body. The art of making the bridles serves the higher art of horsemanship. Someone makes bridles so that others can skillfully ride horses. The bridle maker's work only makes sense in relation to the horseman's activity. And this reveals that there's a natural order, that there's a hierarchy among different human productive activities, where more particular arts exist to serve more general arts. And that produces a hierarchical organization with different arts and ends being ranked under other arts and ends. And this hierarchical organization reflects the rational structure of human activities. So there actually is, Aristotle is saying, there actually is a true hierarchical system of human activities that's ranked from top to bottom by how important it is, how desirable it is. The actions that we perform day by day, they're not random, they're not arbitrary. We don't just all make up and decide what we want to do and decide how valuable it is. There's actually a system, an orderly system in nature that determines what is sought and why. And Aristotle is drawing us to reflect on that natural principle. He goes on and says, both this art, however, and every warlike action are arranged under the military art, and after the same manner other arts are arranged under other powers. So Aristotle goes on from this example and shows that the hierarchy, considering just one example, the hierarchy continues upward. So horsemanship isn't at the top of the hierarchy, but just as bridle making serves horsemanship, in the same way, horsemanship serves the military art, because horses were used in warfare. So the riding of the horse was directed at its use in war. So all of the activities relating to war, making weapons, training soldiers, caring for horses, all of these different activities serve the general's art of conducting military campaigns successfully. All of these arts are directed at victory. And this pattern repeats throughout other human productive activities. Many particular arts serve higher, more comprehensive arts, which may in turn serve even higher arts. And this hierarchical organization shows us the rational ordering of means to ends, where more specific activities serve broader, more important purposes. Aristotle goes on and says, quote, but in all these, the ends of those arts which are architectonic or master arts are more eligible than all the ends of the arts which are subordinate to the master arts. So here Aristotle introduces this idea of architectonic arts, and that word architectonic means master. So architectonic means a master art. An architect is someone who designs a building, and his design of the building directs all of the craftsmen who work to construct that building. So the architect is the master builder. He's the master artist. And everyone else involved in the building is simply doing what the architect says to do. Architecture is the architectonic art in building. And in the same way, architectonic arts are those that direct and organize other arts toward a common purpose. As we read the Ethics, we're going to run into this word eligible a lot. We read, in all these, the ends of those arts which are architectonic are more eligible than all the ends of the arts which are subordinate to the master arts. This word eligible means worthy of choosing or desirable. So if I say that there are a number of candidates who are eligible for the next election, it means they are able to be chosen. Aristotle's establishing that the goals of master arts are more important than the goals of the arts that they direct. So the general's goal of directing military activities toward victory, the general's activity is more important than the bridle maker's activity, more important than the bridle maker's goal of producing good bridles. Because making the bridles, what makes a bridle good or not, is determined by the judgment of the general who uses it in battle. Making bridles is useful insofar as it contributes to military success. And that principle helps us understand how to order our priorities. We should value higher, more comprehensive goods over lower, more particular goods. We should desire the happiness of all people more than the desireness of just ourselves alone. Aristotle continues and says, "For the latter are pursued for the sake of the former." Aristotle explains that there's a reason for this hierarchy. He says subordinate arts, or arts that are set under other arts, exist to serve those higher arts. And we pursue lower goods, not for their own sake, but for the sake of higher goods. The bridle maker makes bridles for the sake of horsemanship. The horseman trains the horses for the sake of military victory. This quote-unquote for the sake of relationship shows us a proper rational ordering of human activities. Understanding this relationship between activities is crucial for ethics because it shows us that not all goods are equal. Not all goods are equal. Some goods are pursued as means to other goods, while other goods are pursued as ends in themselves. This analysis is going to lead Aristotle to ask whether there is some ultimate good. Is there some ultimate good that's pursued purely for its own sake and for which all other goods are pursued? So as Aristotle is looking at these examples, how the bridle-making art is completely determined by the general's military art, he asks the question, well, is there an art which is above the military art? And is there a goal or an end which is above all of these different activities? That's the question that Aristotle is pursuing in this investigation. So Aristotle wants to know whether there is some ultimate good that is pursued only for its own sake and for which all other goods are pursued. That's the important question. He then says, quote, and this is the last line of the chapter, he says, "It makes no difference whether the energies themselves are the ends of actions or something else besides these, in the same manner as in the above-mentioned cases." So Aristotle brings this first chapter to a conclusion by clarifying that his principle, the principle that he's presenting in this opening chapter about the hierarchical ordering of ends, applies universally. Wherever we're talking about activities that are valuable in themselves, energies that is, or whether we're talking about activities that produce external products or works. The same hierarchical relationships apply. Some activities or products serve other activities or products in a rational order by means and ends. This conclusion that Aristotle makes here is important because it shows us that his analysis applies to the complete range of human rational activity. It applies to everything we do, not just to productive arts. And this conclusion prepares the way for what will be his next crucial step. He's going to argue that if there is a hierarchy of goods, if that's true, and it appears to be true, he's saying, then there must be some highest good that gives ultimate meaning and direction to all human activity. That is the goal of this study of moral philosophy or classical ethics. And that brings us to the end of this first chapter. Now, having gone through all the content, and there's a lot of content in this, even though it's a short reading, there's a lot of important concept in there. I'd like to provide you with some points that are worth memorizing to kind of summarize all of that. So let's take a look at 12 different points that are worth memorizing. Number 1, every form of rational human activity aims toward some good. Every form of rational human activity aims toward some good. Number 2, good is that which all things naturally desire or seek. Good is that which all things naturally desire or seek. Number 3, art is productive habit guided by reason that creates or makes external products. Art is productive habit guided by reason that creates external products, external to the one who is acting. Number 4, action is activity that remains in and perfects or improves the agent. Action is activity that remains in and perfects the agent. Number 5, deliberate choice is reasoned decision-making involving intellect and will. Deliberate choice is reasoned decision-making involving intellect and will. Number 6, some ends are activities themselves or energies. Some ends are products or works. Some ends are activities themselves, others are products. Number 7, products are usually more valuable than the productive activities that create them. Products are usually more valuable than the productive activities that create them. Number 8, there are many different goods because there are many different rational activities. There are many different goods because there are many different rational activities. Number 9, arts and activities are arranged in hierarchies where lower ones serve higher ones. Arts and activities are arranged in hierarchies where lower ones serve higher ones. Number 10, master arts or architectonic arts have more important ends than subordinate arts. Master arts or architectonic arts have more important ends than subordinate arts. Number 11, lower goods are pursued for the sake of higher goods. Lower goods are pursued for the sake of higher goods. And lastly, number 12, this hierarchical ordering applies to all forms of rational human activity. This hierarchical ordering applies to all forms of rational human activity. So having gone through all of that, we can wrap up this lecture. In this class, this study, we've looked at Chapter 1 of Book 1 of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. We've discussed how every form of rational human activity aims at some good. We looked at the precise meanings of the words art, method, action, and deliberate choice. We've looked at the difference between activities and products as ends. We've looked at the hierarchical ordering of goods, which Aristotle proves, and how his philosophical observations provide an objective foundation for ethics, which was later integrated into Catholic moral theology. So having covered all of that, now it's time for you to reread and study this lesson for yourself. It's time for you to develop your understanding of the lesson by completing the assignments and quizzes that are provided, and to demonstrate your understanding by mastering those assessments. If you have any questions or need any help, please visit the Academy Help Center at classicalliberal.com/support, where you can get help. Once again, my name is William Michael. I'm the headmaster of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and I hope that you found this lecture helpful. God bless your studies.